Today we'll be covering the history of the filthy brothels of the Wild West. You're going to see a side of this era that you've never seen before. Constructed not by the men who drew out their guns ready to blast away, but by the women who ran the backstage show, wielding a different weapon in a world that was as gritty as it was lawless. When people imagine the Wild West, a lot of things can come to mind, such as the gold rush, railroads, guys doing a massive standoff, drawing their guns, and having an epic pistol duel right after one of those massive tumbleweed balls crosses the frame in a perfectly dramatic tension-building way. This is normally what is brought to the attention of the public when the Wild West is depicted in movies, TV shows, and the like. But a lot of the meat, if you will, is left behind when portraying the West only in this light. Some say the West did not become the West because of its men, but because of its women. And we're not just talking about the wives and mothers of the early settlers. They were important too, no doubt. We're talking about the ladies of the night. These women truly reshaped the era in ways people don't even talk about. Before these women came along, the Wild West was just, well, the West. It was kind of lifeless, boring, and tasteless. Towns were barely towns at all. They were just rough settlements made up of tents and holes. Some holes were for sleeping, others for taking care of morning business, and somewhere where men met their end. These places were just work camps with no sense of home life at all, and things were tough on men. A lot of them were becoming increasingly lonely and purposeless without female company. Things were so rough that men sometimes dressed up in women's clothes to comfort each other. Research by historian Peter Bogue reveals that men often engaged in cross-dressing, often as a means to navigate societal roles, redefine gender identity, or for other practical reasons. When women finally arrived in the West, they saw a bunch of lonely men and spotted a big financial chance. No judgment from society, men wanting company in high demand, the supply was low, so they did what any smart business person would do. They provided it. Back in the 1800s, job options for women were rare. Women back then could hope to make $8 a week at best, mostly as school teachers, laundresses, clerks, or factory workers. Those women took brothels and made them their arena. Working in a brothel gave them independence, and many women in this trade earned more than their male clients. Once women began arriving, the rough work camps became lively towns. With all the money from Euro cowboys, the women built up the local economy, and madams often owned general stores, schools, infirmaries, and even funded churches where I guess people would later confess to their sins that they just committed with these women.
What?
With these new buildings, the economy started to bloom, and the Wild West towns began to take shape. Many madams held land, wealth, and influence, and they often used it to help the community. Some opened schools for orphans and poor kids, supported the Civil War effort, and gave shelter during natural disasters. The influence of these women had a bigger impact than you might think. It even helped Wyoming become the first state to grant women the right to vote in 1869. Remember, the rest of the United States didn't start this movement until 1920. Wyoming's law giving women the right to vote in 1869 was seen as too bold and progressive for the rest of the country. But when word from Washington, D.C. arrived wanting to take it away, Wyoming threatened to leave the Union. They had no other option but to back off and let Wyoming keep its new law. Common workplaces for these ladies back in the Wild West could be a saloon, a dance hall, fancy parlor house, or even the street. These places began very humbly, often using the same wagons the women had traveled in until real buildings were built. Because of the power held by these ladies, they had full rights to do their work and were protected, even under the watch of local authorities in both official and unofficial towns. However, these towns were small, and people tended to settle down and grow quickly. There were some nights when these saloons got so crowded that the beds were just not enough. These ladies may have had some protection from the law, but it often went no further than giving them permission to work as quote-unquote sealing experts. This was a real term used by their customers at the time. Think code word for acquiring their services discreetly, so on paper, these women were being protected. But you know how this goes. Violence against these working women was unfortunately fairly common in the West. The law didn't do much to protect women's dignity, especially for those in the business. Many women didn't report assaults because they knew police wouldn't take them seriously, and their stories would become town gossip. Fear of harm or even death was also a job risk. Some men became possessive or demanded too much. In these cases, the owners of the establishments had to be ready to fight or defend their girls. And physical assaults were not the only threat either. These women were constantly on the watch for a silent, small, yet deadly enemy, venereal disease, which was widespread in the 1800s, and the treatments for it were just as dangerous as the disease itself, not FDA approved at all. Without the aid of modern medicine, namely antibiotics, staying healthy was crucial. If word got out that diseases were present that could seriously damage business, not hard to imagine. To help, many madams encouraged monthly doctor visits and regular checkups to keep diseases away. They also made sure their girls kept good hygiene and ate well so they could increase their defenses. Protection as we know it today did not exist back then. They had a very crude version of it, but it was very expensive and not nearly as effective as your 99% effectiveness you got with most protection methods nowadays. It's estimated that around 20% of these women became pregnant at some point in their careers. Pregnancy was common in the life of a saloon girl, and usually unwanted. It was tough for both their personal lives and for business, but avoiding pregnancy, as we stated, was no easy task. Archaeologists found syringes at a Wild West era brothel that were used to inject mercury, arsenic, and vinegar into the body to prevent pregnancies or treat diseases, even though all of these were terrible for the body. Then, the Comstock Act of 1873 made things even harder for these women, forcing them to rely on homemade remedies that often didn't work. Many of these remedies contained toxic ingredients from plants, often leading to major complications down the line. The true number of children born to working women in the Old West will never be known. However, some women managed to retire this way. Some of them even pursued careers in other areas like politics after retirement, as is the famous case of Sally Stanford. After 5 tries, she was elected to the city council in Sausalito and later became the mayor. When asked why she ran the 5th time, Sally just smiled and famously replied, "We sinners never give up." And that's the story of how the West became the Wild West. Let me know in the comments below. Did you know about this side of its history? Thank you so much for joining me for today's tale. If you had fun or learned anything, do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe button, and also share this video with someone else. It's a very small button for you, and a gigantic leap for my channel. Until the next tale, farewell, and may the gods smile upon you.